I never told my son about my $52,000 monthly income. For 35 years, I lived in the same modest house in Scarborough, drove a reliable old truck, and let everyone assume I was just another retired tradesman living off his pension. When my son nervously called to invite me to meet his fiancée's wealthy family at their Yorkville penthouse, I decided to show up exactly as I always am. No pretense, no fancy clothes, just me. But the moment his future mother-in-law whispered to the housekeeper, "Set an extra place in the kitchen for him. He'll be more comfortable there," I knew exactly who these people were. And when they tried to write me a check for living expenses, they had no idea that the quiet old man they were trying to dismiss actually held their entire future in his hands. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know in the comments what city you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. And have you ever been judged by someone who didn't know your true worth? Let me tell you who I really am. My morning started the same way it had for the past 40 years. Coffee at 5:30, black with no sugar, brewed in the same Mr. Coffee machine I bought in 1989. The kitchen was small, the countertops were dated, and the linoleum floor had seen better days. My neighbors on Birchmount Road probably thought I was just another pensioner counting his coins at the grocery store. What they didn't know was that every month, $52,000 landed in my account like clockwork. As the majority shareholder of Northern Shield Energy, a company I'd built from a single natural gas well in Alberta to a network of pipelines spanning 3 provinces, I could have lived in Rosedale, driven a Mercedes, worn suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Instead, I drove a 2011 Ford F-150 with rust spots on the wheel wells and shopped at No Frills. My phone buzzed on the kitchen table. My son's name lit up the screen. "Morning, Dad?" "Morning, son. You're up early for a Saturday." Marcus worked as a financial analyst at one of the big banks downtown. Good job, steady income, the kind of career that made a father proud. But something in his voice told me this wasn't a casual call. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something." He paused, and I could hear him choosing his words carefully. "Vanessa's parents want to meet you. They've invited us to dinner at their place next weekend." I set down my coffee. "That sounds nice. I'd like to meet them too. The thing is, Dad," another pause, "they live in Yorkville. Her father runs a private equity firm. Her mother sits on the board of the Art Gallery of Ontario. They're very successful people." I waited, sensing there was more. "I just want you to know what you're walking into. Maybe you could wear something nice? That blue blazer you wore to Aunt Helen's funeral?" There it was. My own son, worried that his old man might embarrass him in front of his girlfriend's wealthy family. "I'll see what I can find in the closet," I said quietly. "Thanks, Dad. I really appreciate it. Vanessa's great, and I want this to go well. Her parents have certain expectations." After we hung up, I sat in my small living room, looking at the furniture I'd had for decades. The couch was comfortable, but worn. The TV was an old flat screen that still worked fine. The walls held photos of Marcus growing up, his hockey trophies, his university graduation. I'd raised my son to understand that a man's worth wasn't measured by his possessions. My own father had been a pipe fitter in Edmonton. My mother, a secretary at a grain elevator. They taught me that honest work and good character mattered more than bank accounts. When I struck it lucky with that first gas well, when the money started flowing faster than I could spend it, I made a choice. I would live simply, invest wisely, and never let wealth change who I was. But now my son was asking me to dress up, to pretend to be someone I wasn't, all to impress people who measured others by the size of their wallets. I finished my coffee and made a decision. I would go to that dinner exactly as I was, and I would see what kind of people the Harrington family really were. The week passed slowly. I spent my mornings the way I always did, puttering around the house, tending to the small garden in the backyard, walking to the Tim Hortons on Kingston Road for a double-double and a chat with the other regulars. On Thursday, I made a phone call to my accountant. "Gerald, I need you to pull up the Harrington Capital file." There was a pause, then the sound of keyboard clicking. "Harrington Capital Partners? The private equity firm? That's the one. Let me see." Ah, yes. They're one of our energy sector clients. Their portfolio includes significant investments in Western Canadian natural gas infrastructure. They're actually quite dependent on pipeline access agreements. More clicking. Interesting. They've been trying to negotiate better terms on the Clearwater Junction contract for months. And who holds that contract? We do, sir. Northern Shield has exclusive rights to the Clearwater Junction hub. Harrington Capital's entire northern operations portfolio routes through our infrastructure. I smiled. How much do they pay us annually? Approximately $3.2 million in access fees. It's one of their largest operational expenses. Thank you, Gerald. That's all I needed to know. Saturday evening arrived gray and cold, typical November weather in Toronto. I dressed in my usual clothes, clean but simple. Dark work pants, a flannel shirt, my old brown jacket that had seen me through 100 Alberta winters. My boots were polished but clearly well worn, the kind of practical footwear a working man relies on. I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. White hair, weathered face, hands that showed decades of honest labor before the business success came. I looked exactly like what the Harringtons would expect. A modest retiree who had worked blue-collar jobs his whole life. Perfect. The drive downtown took longer than expected. Traffic on the DVP was brutal, and by the time I found parking near Yorkville, I was running 10 minutes late. I walked past boutiques with Italian names, past restaurants where a single meal cost more than my monthly grocery bill, past couples in designer clothes, walking tiny dogs in cashmere sweaters. The Harrington building was all glass and steel, a tower of wealth rising into the gray sky. The doorman looked at my truck as I pulled up, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to barely concealed disdain. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm here to see the Harringtons. Penthouse." He consulted his tablet, clearly surprised. "Your name?" "Douglas. Douglas McKinnon." One moment. He made a call, his eyes never quite meeting mine. "You can go up. Elevator on the left, top floor." The elevator was mirrored in marble, the kind of opulence designed to remind you that you were entering a different world. I watched my reflection rise through floors of luxury, thinking about what awaited me above. The doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer. And there was Marcus, looking sharp in his tailored suit. Vanessa beside him in a designer dress that probably cost more than my truck. "Dad." Marcus stepped forward, and I caught the flicker of something in his eyes. Embarrassment? Concern. "You made it." Traffic was heavy. I extended my hand to Vanessa. "Nice to finally meet you. Marcus talks about you all the time." She shook my hand briefly, her smile polished but cool. "Nice to meet you too, Mr. McKinnon. My parents are in the living room." The penthouse was everything I expected and more. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, artwork that belonged in museums, furniture that looked more like sculpture than something you'd actually sit on. Fresh flowers everywhere, the kind of elaborate arrangements that cost hundreds of dollars and lasted maybe a week. In the living room, positioned like royalty receiving commoners, sat the Harringtons. Richard Harrington was tall, silver-haired, with the lean build of a man who paid good money to personal trainers. He wore a cashmere sweater and perfectly pressed slacks, a glass of what was probably very expensive scotch in his hand. Margot Harrington matched her husband in every way. Elegant, immaculate, dripping with jewelry that caught the light. She looked at me the way someone might look at a stain on an otherwise perfect carpet. "Mother, father, this is Douglas McKinnon, Marcus's dad." Richard stood, extending his hand with the practiced smile of a man who had closed 1,000 deals. His grip was firm but brief, his eyes already cataloging my appearance. Flannel shirt, work pants, old boots. "Douglas, pleasure to meet you." "Likewise." Margot remained seated, offering her hand as if expecting me to kiss it. "How lovely that you could join us. Marcus has told us so much about you." I doubted that very much. "Please, sit down." She gestured to a chair, the smallest one in the room, positioned slightly apart from the others. "Can we get you something to drink?" "I'm sure we have." "Beer? Do we have beer, Richard?" "I'm sure we can find something," Richard said, pressing a button on a small remote. A woman in a gray uniform appeared almost instantly. "Elena, Bring our guest a beer. Whatever we have. Water is fine, I said. Thank you. An awkward silence settled over the room. I could feel their eyes on me, taking in every detail of my appearance, every sign that I didn't belong in their world. So, Douglas, Richard began, settling back into his chair with the confidence of a man in his kingdom. Marcus tells us you're retired. What did you do for work? Energy sector, mostly. Started out working on drilling rigs in Alberta, then moved into the technical side of things. Pipeline maintenance, infrastructure inspection, that sort of thing. Manual labor, Margot said, her voice carrying a note of sympathy that felt more like pity. That must have been difficult. All those years in the cold, honest work. I never complained. Of course not. She exchanged a glance with her husband. And you live here in Toronto now? Scarborough. Same house for 35 years. Another exchange glance. Richard cleared his throat. Scarborough. That's east of here, isn't it? About 40 minutes, depending on traffic. I see. Elena returned with my water in a crystal glass, served on a silver tray. The contrast between her formal service and my casual appearance wasn't lost on anyone. Vanessa spoke up, her voice bright with forced enthusiasm. Marcus and I were thinking about venue options for the engagement party. There's this wonderful space at the Ritz-Carlton that Mother helped us look at. The Windsor Ballroom, Margot confirmed. Perfect for 300 guests. Very exclusive. 300? I asked. That's quite a party. Well, yes. We have certain social obligations. Business associates, charity board members, the club members. She waved her hand as if this were the most natural thing in the world. One can't exactly have a small affair. I suppose not. Richard leaned forward, his expression taking on that particular look businessmen get when they're about to make a pitch. Douglas, Margot and I have been discussing something, and we wanted to bring it up tonight. I waited. Marcus is a wonderful young man. Bright, ambitious, exactly the kind of person we'd want for our Vanessa. But we also understand that, well, certain circumstances can create complications. What kind of complications? Margot took over, her voice dripping with what she probably thought was compassion. We know that retirement on a fixed income can be challenging, especially in a city as expensive as Toronto. We wouldn't want Marcus to feel any pressure regarding family obligations that might distract from his career. I said nothing, letting her continue. We've discussed this with Vanessa, and we'd like to offer some assistance. A small monthly amount, nothing excessive, just to ensure you're comfortable. Perhaps $1,000? We could set up an automatic transfer. Richard nodded. Consider it a family contribution. Marcus shouldn't have to worry about supporting 2 households on his salary. The room was silent. I could see Marcus's face had gone pale, his hands clenched in his lap. Vanessa studied her manicure, apparently finding it fascinating. That's very generous, I said carefully. But I couldn't accept charity. It's not charity, Margot assured me with a patronizing smile. It's family helping family. We're going to be connected now, aren't we? And family takes care of each other. Especially, Richard added, when some members of the family are better positioned to help than others. The implication was crystal clear. I was the poor relation, the liability that might hold Marcus back. They were the wealthy benefactors, graciously offering to keep me in my place with their $1,000 handouts. Before I could respond, Margot turned to the housekeeper who had reappeared silently. Elena, is dinner ready? Yes, ma'am. Wonderful. She rose, smoothing her dress. Shall we move to the dining room? The dining room was a showcase of wealth, a long table set with china that probably cost more than my annual property taxes. Crystal glasses caught the light from a chandelier that belonged in a palace. Fresh flowers in silver vases, candles in ornate holders, enough silverware at each place setting to confuse anyone not trained in formal dining. But when we reached the table, I noticed something odd. There were only 4 places set at the main table. Margot caught my glance. Oh, Douglas, we thought you might be more comfortable in the breakfast nook. It's just through there, a bit more. Casual. Elena will bring your meal there. She pointed to a small alcove off the kitchen, visible through an open doorway. A single place, setting at a small table, separate from the family. Mother. Marcus's voice was tight. Dad can sit with us. Of course he can, darling, if he prefers. I just thought. She laughed, a tinkling sound that held no warmth. Well, formal dinners can be so tedious for people who aren't used to them. All those courses, all that conversation about things that might not interest him. The breakfast nook is actually quite pleasant. I looked at the small table, at the clear message being sent. I was acceptable enough to meet, but not acceptable enough to dine with. I was to be tucked away, fed separately, kept out of sight. I don't mind formal dinners, I said quietly. I've been to a few in my time. Have you? Margot's eyebrows rose. Well, how versatile. Elena set another place at the main table. The housekeeper moved quickly, adding another setting next to Marcus. But the damage was done. Everyone knew what had just happened. Dinner proceeded with excruciating politeness. The food was exceptional, I'd give them that. Some kind of French cuisine with ingredients I couldn't pronounce, served in portions so small they seemed designed to keep you hungry. The conversation flowed around me like water around a rock. Richard talked about his latest deal, some merger that would make his firm even wealthier. Margot discussed her charity work, the galas and auctions and fundraisers that filled her calendar. Vanessa mentioned their upcoming trip to Street Bart's, where they had a little place for the winter months. "And what about you, Douglas?" Margot asked during a lull. "Do you travel much?" "I went to Muskoka last summer. Rented a cabin for a week." "How nice." She exchanged another of those looks with her husband. "We have a property on Lake Rosso, actually. Perhaps you drove past it." "Maybe. It's the one with the boathouse. 3 stories. We rebuilt it after the original burned down." She smiled. "Insurance covered most of it, of course. Do you have a cottage, Douglas?" "No. Just the house in Scarborough." "Right. Well, cottage country isn't for everyone. The upkeep can be quite demanding." Richard had been checking his phone throughout dinner. Now he looked up with a frown. "Margot, I've just had an email from Crawford. Apparently, there's some issue with the Clearwater Junction contract." My ears perked up, but I kept my expression neutral. "That Northern Shield outfit is being difficult about renewal terms," Richard continued, scrolling through his phone. "They want a 15% increase on access fees. Crawford says it could cost us millions. Can't you just use a different route?" "There is no different route. Northern Shield has exclusive rights to the only viable pipeline hub in the region. We're completely dependent on them." He set down his phone with an annoyed sigh. "I've been trying to get a meeting with their executive team for months. No one will return my calls." "How frustrating," Margot sympathized. "The whole company seems to be run by some recluse who never appears in public. No photos, no interviews, just a name on the documents. Douglas McKinnon." He shook his head. "Probably some old Alberta oil man sitting on his fortune, making life difficult for everyone else." I took a sip of water, carefully keeping my face expressionless. "That does sound frustrating. The energy sector is full of these types," Richard continued, warming to his subject. "Men who made money through luck or timing, not real business acumen. They don't understand how modern finance works. They just sit on their assets and squeeze everyone who needs access." "Perhaps they have their reasons," I suggested mildly. "What reasons could there possibly be? If someone offers you fair market value for something, you take it. That's basic economics. But these old pipeline barons," he waved his hand dismissively, "no vision, no ambition. They'd rather live in the past than engage with the modern business world." Margot leaned toward me conspiratorially. "Richard has been under such stress with this situation. It's affecting his blood pressure." "I can imagine. If we lose that contract renewal on bad terms, it could affect our entire northern portfolio." Richard's jaw tightened. "Millions of dollars, all because some fossil won't come to the table." I nodded sympathetically while making a mental note. This was even better than I'd anticipated. Dessert arrived, some elaborate French pastry that looked like architecture more than food. As we ate, Margot circled back to her earlier offer. "Douglas, have you given any more thought to our proposal? The monthly assistance? I appreciate the offer, but I really don't need it. Everyone needs help sometimes. There's no shame in accepting a helping hand." "Margot, perhaps we should," Marcus started. "I'm just concerned about your father's well-being, darling. Scarborough isn't exactly, well, it's not the safest neighborhood, is it? And at his age, living alone, on a fixed income. She shook her head sadly. We'd hate to think of him struggling. I manage fine. I'm sure you do. But imagine if you didn't have to just manage. Imagine if you could actually be comfortable. She reached over and patted my hand like I was a child. Think about it. We could even help you find a nicer place to live. Something closer to Marcus, perhaps. A small condo in a better area. I like my house. Of course you do. It's your home. But sometimes we have to let go of the past to embrace a better future. She smiled that patronizing smile again. Let us help you, Douglas. Let us take care of you. The table fell silent. I could see Marcus wrestling with himself, wanting to speak up but not knowing how. Vanessa was studying her dessert plate. Richard was checking his phone again. Tell you what, I said finally. Let me think about it. It's a big decision. Of course, take all the time you need. Margot beamed, clearly believing she'd won. Family takes care of family. That's what we believe. After dessert, we moved back to the living room for coffee. Or rather, they had coffee. I was offered something called a digestif that smelled like medicine and probably cost more than a decent bottle of wine. Richard had been on his phone for the past 20 minutes, his expression growing increasingly troubled. Finally, he excused himself to make a call in his study. Business never stops, Margot sighed. That's the price of success. What exactly does Richard's firm do? I asked, playing dumb. Private equity. They invest in companies, help them grow, create value. She said this, as if explaining basic concepts to a slow student. It's quite complicated, lots of numbers and contracts. Sounds impressive. It is. Richard has built something remarkable. Harrington Capital is one of the top firms in the country. Of course, every business has challenges, but Richard always finds a way through. Richard returned, his face pale. I need to speak with you privately, Margot. Is everything all right? Just come with me, please. They disappeared into the study, leaving me alone with Marcus and Vanessa. The silence was uncomfortable, filled with unspoken tensions. Dad, I'm sorry about all this, Marcus said quietly. I didn't know they would offer you money like that. It's all right, son. No, it's not. You're my father. You don't need their charity. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. They mean well. They just have a particular way of showing it. Do they? Marcus's voice had an edge I rarely heard, because it felt more like they were trying to buy off my father so they wouldn't have to deal with him. Marcus, that's not fair. Isn't it the breakfast nook, Vanessa? They were going to seat my father in the kitchen like he was the help. I put my hand on my son's arm. It's fine, Marcus. Really. People show you who they are. That's valuable information. Before he could respond, Richard and Margot emerged from the study. Something had changed. Richard's confident demeanor had cracked, replaced by something closer to desperation. Douglas, he said, his voice strained, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. All right. Your last name is McKinnon. You said you worked in the energy sector in Alberta, pipeline infrastructure. That's right. Did you ever work for a company called Northern Shield Energy? The room went very quiet. I reached for my wallet, the worn leather case I'd carried for decades. Past the basic debit card, past the coffee shop loyalty stamps. To the card, I rarely showed anyone. Heavy black metal, my name embossed in silver. Douglas McKinnon, Chairman, Northern Shield Energy. I placed it on the coffee table. Richard Harrington went white. You're Douglas McKinnon. The Douglas McKinnon. Guilty. But you live in Scarborough. You drive an old truck. You're wearing comfortable clothes. Yes. Margot's hand had gone to her throat, her fingers clutching the pearl necklace that suddenly seemed less impressive. I don't understand. What's there to understand? I built a company. It made money. Quite a lot of money, actually. But I never saw the point in changing who I was just because my bank balance grew. Richard sank into a chair. The Clearwater Junction hub. You own exclusive rights to that entire network. I do. Our firm, Harrington Capital. We pay you over $3 million a year for access. $3.2 million? As of last quarter, you're one of our largest clients. The silence was absolute. Margot looked like she might faint. Richard's hands were shaking. Vanessa had gone pale, while Marcus, my boy, he was starting to smile. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Richard said slowly. We spent the entire evening treating you like a charity case? Yes. And the whole time, you held our company's future in your hands. That's one way to look at it. Richard ran his fingers through his silver hair. The breakfast nook. My God, we tried to seat you in the breakfast nook. You did. And Margot offered you $1,000 a month. Very generous of her. Your company's net worth is, I don't like to brag, let's just say it's significantly more than $1,000. Margot found her voice. Why didn't you say something? Why did you let us? Why did you? Because I wanted to see who you really were. I stood, straightening my flannel shirt. When you think someone has nothing to offer, you show your true character. You showed me tonight exactly how you treat people you consider beneath you. Douglas, please, Richard started. We made assumptions, terrible assumptions. We never meant. You offered to set me up in the kitchen like hired help. You patronized my son. You tried to buy me off so I wouldn't be a distraction to your daughter's fancy life. I picked up my card and returned it to my wallet. Those aren't assumptions. Those are choices. The contract renewal, Richard said desperately. We need that pipeline access. Our entire northern portfolio depends on it. I'm aware. If we could just sit down, discuss terms, perhaps we could. Richard. I met his eyes directly. For months, you've been trying to get a meeting with Northern Shield. No one would return your calls. Do you know why? He shook his head. Because I personally review every meeting request. And when I saw Harrington Capital on the list, I remembered reading about your firm in the business section. How you treated a small contractor in Newfoundland, drove them into bankruptcy over a contract dispute, then bought their assets for pennies. A family business, 3 generations, destroyed because you could. His face reddened. That was a business decision. So is this. I turned to my son. Marcus, I think it's time for me to go. Marcus stood immediately. I'll walk you out. Douglas, wait. Richard's voice had taken on a pleading note. Please, let's talk about this. We can make things right. Can you? I paused at the doorway. Can you unseat me in the kitchen? Can you unoffer me charity? Can you unjudge me for my clothes and my address and my old truck? He had no answer. Here's what's going to happen, Richard. On Monday morning, you're going to receive a formal notice from Northern Shield regarding your contract renewal. The terms will be 15% above current rates, non-negotiable. You'll have 30 days to accept or find alternative routing for your northern operations. That's millions of dollars. $3.68 million annually, by my calculation. Consider it the cost of a lesson in how to treat people. Margot stepped forward. Mr. McKinnon, Douglas, please. We're going to be family. Surely we can work something out. I looked at her, at the woman who had tried to hide me away in a kitchen nook, who had offered me pocket change like I was a beggar. Family takes care of family. Isn't that what you said? Well, I'm taking care of mine. My son deserves to be with someone whose family respects him and where he comes from, not people who try to erase his history to fit their image. I turned to Vanessa, who had remained silent through all of this. You seem like a nice enough young woman, but if you can't love my son without being embarrassed by his father, then you're not the right person for him. Her eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. Marcus took my arm. Come on, Dad. I'll drive you home. What about your car? I'll pick it up tomorrow. Or never. Right now, I just want to be with my father. We walked to the elevator together, leaving the Harrington family standing in their penthouse, full of expensive art and designer furniture, and absolutely no idea how to respond to what had just happened. As the elevator doors closed, Marcus let out a long breath. Dad, $52,000 a month, give or take. You've been living in that house in Scarborough, driving that old truck, wearing those clothes, and you're worth millions? Hundreds of millions, actually. But who's counting? He laughed, a sound of pure release. All these years, I thought. I worried about you being lonely after Mom passed, about whether you could afford your medication, about whether you needed help with the property taxes. I know. And I let you worry because I wanted you to care. I wanted you to be the kind of man who looks after his father, not because of what I can give you, but because of who you are. But why keep it secret? Because I wanted to see who you would become without the weight of expectation. If you'd known you were going to inherit a fortune, would you have worked as hard at school? Would you have built your own career? Would you have learned to stand on your own feet? He was quiet for a moment. Maybe not. Exactly. My father taught me that a man's worth comes from his character, not his wallet. I wanted to teach you the same thing. The elevator reached the lobby. The doorman looked surprised to see Marcus with me, probably expecting that I'd been escorted out the service entrance. As we walked to my truck, Marcus spoke again. What happens now? With Vanessa? I unlocked the doors and we climbed in. The engine started with its familiar, reliable rumble. That's up to you, son. And up to her. What did you see tonight? I saw her parents treat you like garbage. I saw her say nothing. And what did you learn from that? He was quiet as I pulled out of the parking spot and headed toward the Don Valley Parkway. The city lights reflected off the wet streets, 1,000 points of light in the autumn darkness. I learned that I was so worried about impressing them that I forgot what actually matters, he said finally. I asked you to dress up because I was embarrassed by you, by my own father, the man who raised me, who taught me everything I know about being a good person. You learned from tonight, that's what matters. But Dad, what you did back there, revealing who you really are, threatening their contract, isn't that just revenge? I considered the question carefully as I merged onto the highway. Maybe partly. I'm not perfect, Marcus. When someone disrespects my son, tries to buy me off, treats me like I'm not good enough to sit at their table. Yes, there's a part of me that wanted them to know exactly who they were dealing with. But mostly, I wanted you to see them clearly. Without my intervention, you might have married into that family and spent years trying to be good enough for people who would never truly accept where you came from. Now you know. Know what? That they'll smile at you when they need something and dismiss you when they don't. That their love comes with conditions and fine print. That to them, family isn't about loyalty or character. It's about status and convenience. Marcus stared out the window at the passing cityscape. Vanessa's not like that. At least, I didn't think she was. She sat there while her mother tried to seat me in the kitchen. She said nothing when they offered me charity. She watched them humiliate me and didn't speak a word in my defense. I glanced at him. What does that tell you about who she'll be when times get hard? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. We drove in silence through the city, past the towers of downtown, through the East End neighborhoods, where I'd made my home. When I pulled into my driveway, the modest house looked exactly as it always had. Small, tidy, unpretentious. You could live anywhere, Marcus said. Rosedale, Forest Hill, anywhere in the world. I could, but this is where I'm comfortable. This is where your mother and I built our life together. This is where you took your first steps, where you learned to ride a bike, where you brought home your first girlfriend. I turned off the engine. Why would I leave all that for a bigger house and a fancier address? Because most people would. I'm not most people, and I raised you not to be either. We sat in the driveway, father and son, in the quiet of the suburban night. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. A car passed, its headlights sweeping across the front yard. Dad? Yeah? I'm sorry. For asking you to dress up. For being worried about what they'd think. For not defending you more when they were being awful. You're forgiven, son. That's what fathers do. I'm also proud of you. Not because of the money or the company or any of that. Because you've always been exactly who you are, no matter what anyone else thinks. That takes real courage. I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the heater. Thank you, Marcus. That means more than you know. What happens on Monday? With the contract, Northern Shield will send the revised terms. Harrington Capital will pay more for access to our pipeline network. They can afford it, trust me. And maybe, just maybe, Richard Harrington will think twice before treating someone like a second-class citizen based on how they're dressed. And if he doesn't accept the terms, then he'll need to find alternative routing for his northern operations, which will cost him even more and take years to arrange. Either way, I'm not losing sleep over it. Marcus shook his head slowly. You really played the long game tonight, didn't you? Sometimes the best way to show people who you are is to let them show you who they are first. We got out of the truck and walked to the front door. The porch light flickered. It needed a new bulb, something I kept forgetting to replace. Inside, the house was warm and familiar. The same furniture, the same photos on the walls, the same comfortable spaces I'd known for decades. Marcus looked around as if seeing it for the first time. I used to wish we lived somewhere fancier. When I was a teenager, I was embarrassed to bring friends here because it wasn't like the houses in the nice neighborhoods. I know, but now I understand. This house isn't about impressing anyone. It's about being real, being authentic. Your mother understood that too. She could have had anything she wanted, designer clothes, luxury cars, a mansion with staff. But she chose this life because it was honest, because it was us. I moved to the kitchen and put on the kettle. Some things didn't change. A cup of tea at the end of a long evening was one of them. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything. When did you know that you were going to reveal who you really were? I thought about it while the kettle heated, the moment they offered me money. Up until then, I was willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. Rich people can be generous and kind. Having money doesn't automatically make you a bad person. But when Margot offered me $1,000 a month like I was some charity case she was graciously supporting, when she suggested I move somewhere better and let them take care of me, that's when I knew. Knew what? That they didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a problem to be managed, an inconvenience to be minimized, a poor relation who might embarrass their daughter or make demands on their future son-in-law. I poured the boiling water into 2 mugs. No amount of money in the world excuses treating another human being that way. Marcus accepted his tea and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd done homework as a child, where we'd had 1,000 family dinners, where his mother and I had planned our life together. I'm going to call Vanessa tomorrow, he said. We need to talk. That's your decision, son. Whatever you choose, I'll support you. But what do you think I should do? I considered the question carefully. I think you should ask yourself some hard questions. Can you imagine bringing your children to visit those grandparents? Can you imagine holidays with people who look down on where you come from? Can you imagine growing old with someone who couldn't find the courage to speak up when her parents were mistreating your father? Those are hard questions. Life is hard questions. Marriage is hard questions. The easy thing would be to pretend tonight didn't happen, to smooth things over, to convince yourself that the Harringtons will change. But people don't change who they are at their core. They just get better at hiding it. Marcus sipped his tea in silence. I didn't push him. Some decisions needed time and space to form. I should go, he said finally. I'll take an Uber back to my place. Stay here tonight. Your old room is still made up. He smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all evening. Yeah, I think I'd like that. I watched him climb the stairs to his childhood bedroom, the same room where he'd dreamed about hockey careers and first cars and all the possibilities of youth. Then I sat alone in the kitchen, thinking about the evening. The Harringtons were probably in crisis mode right now. Phone calls to lawyers, emergency meetings, desperate attempts to figure out how to salvage their relationship with Northern Shield. Richard would be calculating the cost of his arrogance in dollar figures, running the numbers on what a 15% increase would mean for his bottom line. And Margot would be trying to understand how the shabby old man she'd tried to seat in the kitchen turned out to hold her family's financial future in his weathered hands. I felt no guilt about what I'd done. They had shown me exactly who they were, and I had shown them who I was. The balance was restored. But beyond the satisfaction of justice served, there was something deeper. Marcus had seen tonight what I'd always tried to teach him about character and worth, and the dangers of judging people by appearances. He'd learned that lesson not from my words, but from watching it play out in real time. That was worth more than any contract renewal. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee. Marcus was in the kitchen, already dressed, making breakfast with ingredients I didn't remember buying. "I went to the No Frills on Kingston Road," he explained. "Figured you could use some fresh food." "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to." He set a plate in front of me. Scrambled eggs, toast, bacon, simple food, prepared with care. "Dad, I called Vanessa this morning." I waited. "I told her I needed time to think," she cried. She said her parents didn't represent her, that she loved me regardless of everything. He sat across from me, his own plate untouched. But then she said something that made up my mind. "What?" She said her parents would come around once they realized how valuable a connection to Northern Shield could be. That once they understood you were rich, they'd treat you differently. He shook his head. "As if that makes it better. As if the problem was that they didn't know you were wealthy. Not that they treated a human being like garbage." So I ended it. Told her I couldn't be with someone who thought the issue was a misunderstanding about net worth rather than basic human decency. I reached across the table and gripped his hand. "I'm proud of you, son. It hurts. I really did love her, or thought I did. But if that's her family, if that's how she was raised to think about people, then what kind of mother would she be to our children? What kind of values would she pass on?" Those are the right questions to ask. The hard questions. I learned from the best. We ate breakfast together in comfortable silence. Through the kitchen window, I could see my small backyard, the garden that still held the last of the autumn vegetables, the fence that needed painting come spring. An ordinary house, on an ordinary street, in an ordinary neighborhood. But inside that house was something extraordinary. A father and son, connected by more than blood or money, connected by values passed down through generations, connected by the understanding that true worth had nothing to do with bank accounts or addresses or the clothes you wore. That evening, my phone rang. Richard Harrington. I let it go to voicemail. The message was long, apologetic, full of business, speak about reconsidering positions and moving forward together, and tremendous respect for your accomplishments. He mentioned a revised offer on the contract, more favorable terms, a desire to repair the relationship. I deleted the message without responding. Some lessons need to stick, and some bridges, once burned, don't get rebuilt with apologies and better contract terms. 3 months later, Marcus brought someone new to meet me. Her name was Sarah, a teacher at an elementary school in Markham. She arrived at my Scarborough house in a modest car, wearing jeans and a sweater, carrying a homemade apple pie. "Mr. McKinnon," she said, shaking my hand warmly. "Marcus has told me so much about you. Good things, I hope, the best. He says you're the wisest man he knows." We had dinner at my kitchen table, nothing fancy, just a roast chicken and vegetables from my garden. Sarah talked about her students, about her passion for teaching, about growing up in a small town in northern Ontario where her father worked at a paper mill and her mother ran a daycare out of their home. "Marcus tells me you were in the energy sector," she said. "That must have been interesting work." "It had its moments. I don't know much about business, but I know it takes hard work and dedication to build something that lasts. My dad always said there's no substitute for showing up every day and doing your best." I looked at this young woman with her kind eyes and genuine smile, her total lack of pretension, her obvious love for my son. She didn't ask about money or property or connections. She asked about family, about values, about what mattered. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He is. I'm hoping he and Marcus can meet soon. I think they'd get along." After she left, Marcus helped me wash the dishes. "So, what do you think?" "I think she's wonderful. She doesn't know about Northern Shield, about any of it. She thinks I'm just a guy who works at a bank and has a dad in Scarborough with a nice garden." "Is that going to be a problem?" He shook his head. "I'm going to tell her eventually, but not yet. I want her to know me first. To love me for who I am, not what I might inherit." "That's exactly right, son. I learned that from you, Dad." I dried the last plate and put it away. Through the window, I could see the first stars appearing in the winter sky. Another evening in my ordinary house, with my extraordinary son, living a life of quiet purpose and authentic happiness. The Harringtons were probably dining in their Yorkville penthouse right now, surrounded by expensive art and designer furniture and the hollow echo of their own importance. Their contract renewal had been signed at the new rates, costing them millions more per year. A small price, really, for the lesson they'd learned. But that was their world, not mine. My world was here, in a kitchen that needed updating, in a house that needed work, in a life that needed nothing more than it already had. And that was exactly enough. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to Shattered Vengeance for more stories that prove true worth has nothing to do with how much you earn or where you live. Sometimes the richest people are the ones who need nothing to prove.